The Economy of Machinery and Manufactures by Charles Babbage 1832. Section 2. Chapter 24. On Over-Manufacturing. 284. One of the natural and almost inevitable consequences of competition is the production of a supply much larger than the demand requires. This result usually arises periodically, and it is equally important, both to the masters and to the workmen, to prevent its occurrence, or to foresee its arrival. In situations where a great number of very small capitalists exist, where each master works himself and is assisted by his own family, or by a few journeymen, and where a variety of different articles is produced, a curious system of compensation has arisen which in some measure diminishes the extent to which fluctuations of wages would otherwise reach. This is accomplished by a species of middlemen or factors, persons possessing some capital, who, whenever the price of any of the articles in which they deal is greatly reduced, purchase it on their own account, in the hopes of selling at a profit when the market is better. These persons, in ordinary times, act as salesmen or agents, and make up assortments of goods at the market price, for the use of the home or foreign dealer. They possess large warehouses in which to make up their orders, or keep in store articles purchased during periods of depression, thus acting as a kind of flywheel in equalizing the market price. 285. The effect of over-manufacturing upon great establishments is different. When an oversupply has reduced prices, one of two events usually occurs. The first is a diminished payment for labor, the other is a diminution of the number of hours during which the laborers work, together with a diminished rate of wages. In the former case, production continues to go on at its ordinary rate; in the latter, the production itself being checked, the supply again adjusts itself to the demand as soon as the stock on hand is worked off, and prices then regain their former level. The latter course appears, in the first instance, to be the best both for masters and men, but there seems to be a difficulty in accomplishing this, except where the trade is in few hands. In fact, it is almost necessary, for its success, that there should be a combination amongst the masters or amongst the men, or, what is always far preferable to either, the mutual agreement for their joint interests. Combination amongst the men is difficult, and is always attended with the evils which arise from the ill will excited against any persons who, in the perfectly justifiable exercise of their judgment, are disposed not to act with the majority. The combination of the masters, on the other hand, is unavailing, unless the whole body of them agree. For if any one master can procure more labor for his money than the rest, he will be able to undersell them. 286. If we look only at the interests of the consumer, the case is different. When too large a supply has produced a great reduction of price, it opens the consumption of the article to a new class, and increases the consumption of those who previously employed it. It is therefore against the interest of both these parties that a return to the former price should occur. It is also certain, that by the diminution of profit which the manufacturer suffers from the diminished price, his ingenuity will be additionally stimulated, that he will apply himself to discover other and cheaper sources for the supply of his raw material, that he will endeavor to contrive improved machinery, which shall manufacture it at a cheaper rate, or try to introduce new arrangements into his factory, which shall render the economy of it more perfect. In the event of his success, by any of these courses or by their joint effects, the real and substantial good will be produced. A larger portion of the public will receive advantage from the use of the article, and they will procure it at a lower price, and the manufacturer, though his profit on each operation is reduced, will yet, by the more frequent returns on the larger produce of his factory, find his real gain at the end of the year nearly the same as it was before, whilst the wages of the workmen will return to their level, and both the manufacturer and the workman will find the demand less fluctuating, from its being dependent on a larger number of customers. 287. It would be highly interesting, if we could trace, even approximately, through the history of any great manufacture, the effects of gluts in producing improvements in machinery, or in methods of working, and if we could show what addition to the annual quantity of goods previously manufactured, was produced by each alteration. It would probably be found, that the increased quantity manufactured by the same capital, when worked with the new improvement, would produce nearly the same rate of profit as other modes of investment. Perhaps the manufacture of iron 1* would furnish the best illustration of this subject, because, by having the actual price of pig and bar iron at the same place and at the same time, the effect of a change in the value of currency, as well as several other sources of irregularity, would be removed. 288. At the present moment, whilst the manufacturers of iron are complaining of the ruinously low price of their produce, a new mode of smelting iron is coming into use, which, if it realizes the statement of the patentees, promises to reduce greatly the cost of production. The improvement consists in heating the air previously to employing it for blowing the furnace. One of the results is that coal may be used instead of coke, and this, in its turn, diminishes the quantity of limestone which is required for the fusion of the ironstone. The following statement by the proprietors of the patent is extracted from Brewster's Journal, 1832, page 349. Comparative view of the quantity of materials required at the Clyde Iron Works to smelt a ton of foundry pig iron, and the quantity of foundry pig iron smelted from each furnace weekly. Fuel in tons of 20 cwv each cwv 112 lbs, ironstone, limestone cwv, weekly produce in pig iron tons. 1. With air not heated and coke, 7 3/1/4, 15, 45 2. With air heated and coke, 4 3/4, 3 1/4, 10, 63. With air heated and coals not coked, 2 1/4, 3 1/4, 7 1/2, 65. Notes. 1. To the coals stated in the second and third lines, must be added 5 cwv of small coals, required to heat the air. 2. The expense of the apparatus for applying the heated air will be from £200 to £300 per furnace. 3. No coals are now coked at the Clyde Iron Works. At all the 3 furnaces the iron is smelted with coals. 4. The 3 furnaces are blown by a double-powered steam engine, with a steam cylinder 50 inches in diameter, and a blowing cylinder 80 inches in diameter, which compresses the air so as to carry 2 1/2 lbs per square inch. There are 2 tuyeres to each furnace. The muzzles of the blowpipes are 3 inches in diameter. 5. The air heated to upwards of 600 degrees Fahrenheit. It will melt lead at the distance of 3 inches from the orifice through which it issues from the pipe. 289. The increased effect produced by thus heating the air is by no means an obvious result, and an analysis of its action will lead to some curious views respecting the future application of machinery for blowing furnaces. Every cubic foot of atmospheric air, driven into a furnace, consists of 2 gases. 2 * about 1/5 being oxygen, and 4/5 azote. According to the present state of chemical knowledge, the oxygen alone is effective in producing heat, and the operation of blowing the furnace may be thus analyzed. 1. The air is forced into the furnace in a condensed state, and, immediately expanding, abstracts heat from the surrounding bodies. 2. Being itself of moderate temperature, it would, even without expansion, still require heat to raise it to the temperature of the hot substances to which it is to be applied. 3. On coming into contact with the ignited substances in the furnace, the oxygen unites with them, parting at the same moment with a large portion of its latent heat, and forming compounds which have less specific heat than their separate constituents. Some of these pass up the chimney in a gaseous state, whilst others remain in the form of melted slags, floating on the surface of the iron, which is fused by the heat thus set at liberty. 4. The effects of the azote are precisely similar to the first and second of those above described. It seems to form no combinations, and contributes nothing, in any stage, to augment the heat. The plan, therefore, of heating the air before driving it into the furnace saves, obviously, the whole of that heat which the fuel must have supplied in raising it from the temperature of the external air up to that of 600 degrees Fahrenheit, thus rendering the fire more intense, and the glassy slags more fusible, and perhaps also more effectually decomposing the iron ore. The same quantity of fuel, applied at once to the furnace, would only prolong the duration of its heat, not augment its intensity. 290. The circumstance of so large a portion of the air driven into furnaces being not merely useless, but acting really as a cooling, instead of a heating, cause, added to so great a waste of mechanical power in condensing it, amounting, in fact, to 4/5 of the whole, clearly shows the defects of the present method, and the want of some better mode of exciting combustion on a large scale. The following suggestions are thrown out as likely to lead to valuable results, even though they should prove ineffectual for their professed object. 291. The great difficulty appears to be to separate the oxygen, which aids combustion, from the azote which impedes it. If either of those gases becomes liquid at a lower pressure than the other, and if those pressures are within the limits of our present powers of compression, the object might be accomplished. Let us assume, for example, that oxygen becomes liquid under a pressure of 200 atmospheres, whilst azote requires a pressure of 250. Then if atmospheric air be condensed to the 200th part of its bulk, the oxygen will be found in a liquid state at the bottom of the vessel in which the condensation is effected, and the upper part of the vessel will contain only azote in the state of gas. The oxygen, now liquefied, may be drawn off for the supply of the furnace, but as it ought when used to have a very moderate degree of condensation, its expansive force may be previously employed in working the small engine. The compressed azote also in the upper part of the vessel, though useless for combustion, may be employed as a source of power, and, by its expansion, work another engine. By these means the mechanical force exerted in the original compression would all be restored, except that small part retained for forcing the pure oxygen into the furnace, and the much larger part lost in the friction of the apparatus. 292. The principal difficulty to be apprehended in these operations is that of packing the working piston, so as to bear the pressure of 200 or 300 atmospheres, but this does not seem insurmountable. It is possible also that the chemical combination of the two gases which constitute common air may be effected by such pressures. If this should be the case, it might offer a new mode of manufacturing nitrous or nitric acids. The result of such experiments might take another direction. If the condensation were performed over liquids, it is possible that they might enter into new chemical combinations. Thus, if air were highly condensed in a vessel containing water, the latter might unite with an additional dose of oxygen, for which might afterwards be easily disengaged for the use of the furnace. 293. The further cause of the uncertainty of the results of such an experiment arises from the possibility that azote may really contribute to the fusion of the mixed mass in the furnace, though its mode of operating is at present unknown. An examination of the nature of the gases issuing from the chimneys of iron foundries might perhaps assist in clearing up this point, and, in fact, if such inquiries were also instituted upon the various products of all furnaces, we might expect the elucidation of many points in the economy of the metallurgic art. 294. It is very possible also, that the action of oxygen in a liquid state might be exceedingly corrosive, and that the containing vessels must be lined with platinum or some other substance of very difficult oxidation, and most probably new and unexpected compounds would be formed at such pressures. In some experiments made by Count Rumford in 1797, on the force of fired gunpowder, he noticed a solid compound, which always appeared in the gun barrel when the ignited powder had no means of escaping, and, in those cases, the gas which escaped on removing the restraining pressure was usually inconsiderable. 295. If the liquefied gases are used, the form of the iron furnace must probably be changed, and perhaps it may be necessary to direct the flame from the ignited fuel upon the ore to be fused, instead of mixing that ore with the fuel itself, by a proper regulation of the blast. An oxygenating or deoxygenating flame might be procured, and from the intensity of the flame, combined with its chemical agency, we might expect the most refractory ore to be smelted, and that ultimately the metals at present almost infusible, such as platinum, titanium, and others, might be brought into common use, and thus effect a revolution in the arts. 296. Supposing, on the occurrence of a glut, that new and cheaper modes of producing are not discovered, and that the production continues to exceed the demand, then it is apparent that too much capital is employed in the trade, and after a time, the diminished rate of profit will drive some of the manufacturers to other occupations. What particular individuals will leave it must depend on a variety of circumstances. Superior industry and attention will enable some factories to make a profit rather beyond the rest. Superior capital in others will enable them, without these advantages, to support competition longer, even at a loss, with the hope of driving the smaller capitalists out of the market, and then reimbursing themselves by an advanced price. It is, however, better for all parties, that this contest should not last long, and it is important that no artificial restraint should interfere to prevent it. An instance of such restriction, and of its injurious effect, occurs at the port of Newcastle, where a particular Act of Parliament requires that every ship shall be loaded in its turn. The Committee of the House of Commons, in their report on the coal trade, state that, under the regulations contained in this Act, if more ships enter into the trade than can be profitably employed in it, the loss produced by detention in port, and waiting for a cargo, which must consequently take place, instead of falling, as it naturally would, upon particular ships, and forcing them from the trade, is now divided evenly amongst them, and the loss thus created is shared by the whole number. Report, page 6. 297. It is not pretended, in this short view, to trace out all the effects or remedies of over-manufacturing. The subject is difficult, and, unlike some of the questions already treated, requires a combined view of the relative influence of many concurrent causes. Notes. 1. The average price per ton of pig iron, bar iron, and coal, together with the price paid for labor at the works, for long series of years, would be very valuable, and I shall feel much indebted to anyone who will favor me with it for any, even short, period. 2. The accurate proportions are, by measure, oxygen 21, azote 79. 3. A similar reasoning may be applied to lamps. An argand burner, whether used for consuming oil or gas, admits almost an unlimited quantity of air. It would deserve inquiry, whether a smaller quantity might not produce greater light, and, possibly, a different supply furnish more heat with the same expenditure of fuel. 4. Deutoxide of hydrogen, the oxygenated water of thinner